The Buffalo Bills and their fan base have suffered more heartache than any other team in the National Football League. But that pain has made us a family. And the family turned the pain into energy. And that energy is stored up and ready for the season of reckoning. Today on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you ever so much for being here today. We are discussing the Buffalo Bills season of reckoning. Before we get into it, a huge thanks to everyone who has come out in support of the channel, all of the subscribers, the views we've gotten, the comments, the likes on the videos. Appreciate it very, very much. And of course, if you are new to the channel, we encourage you to do the very same. It only takes about a nanosecond to hit both of those subscribe and like buttons. But let's get into it. And I'm going to tell a story today of how I believe we've gotten to this place and where we're going in these 5 areas, starting with the fact that the NFL is a league of heartbreak. It's not a league of champions. We'll get into it and we'll talk about why. And then we'll move on to how that heartache, in the case of the Buffalo Bills, has created an energy and a bond that has made us a family. And the energy of that pain is immeasurable because it builds up and it is in place for what is going to happen this season, in my estimation. Then we'll talk about a bit of how we got here in our section called The Process of Trust. Of course, a twist on Sean McDermott's famous line when he came into the Bills of trusting the process. Well, this is how we've developed trust in this Bills administration and this Bills team. And then we'll talk about what is in place this particular season that makes all signs point to now, to why the Bills may well be extremely successful in this particular campaign. And finally, I am going to talk about what will be the seismic redemption of the Bills in this season, with an energy explosion that has been stored up of decades of pain and decades of heartache. And then I've got a special prediction right at the end of the podcast, presenting it in a little special way. Just teasing that. You'll see at the end if you stick with it. So let's get into it now. Go. The NFL is the league of heartbreak. It seems those are strange words to utter at this time of year. Training camps are opening. The preseason is upon us. And hope runs high in every franchise and every fan base of those franchises. But of course, as we know, by the end of the season, in February of 2026, 31 of 32 teams will end up the campaign without the Vince Lombardi trophy. It's about 97% of the league. It is a league of heartbreak. The predominant emotions in the NFL are those of sorrow, anger, and frustration. They are not of joy and exuberance and jubilation. Sure, that happens. We all know that feeling when Josh and the boys could put a 40 burger on the Titans, for example. But it is the losses that have the biggest impact. And this is not just true for fans, it's also true for players and coaches. I would strongly urge, and especially here before the season gets going, it's a great read. It's called Collision Low Crossers by author Nick Dawidoff. And Nick spent the 2011 season in its entirety with the New York Jets football team. And you would think it'd be mostly about the players and about the excitement of games and schemes and so forth and end zone dances, whatever. No, it's really largely about the coaches. And interestingly, the sentiment that comes out from the coaches is that it is the losing that is the most difficult. It's what sticks with you. Winning becomes more of a relief from losing than it is a glorious and joyous occasion. The fact is that losing is what drives most coaches out of this game. In fact, Bill Parcells himself stopped coaching because he just couldn't handle the losing. And of course, this is a coach who won a Super Bowl, unfortunately. But we have to deal with the fact that that is the predominant emotion. And in our next segment, we're going to get into how Buffalo Bills fans have dealt with that predominant NFL emotion. So let's get into it now and stick with me. Now, there is not a single team in the NFL or fan base thereof that has not experienced a gut-wrenching, yank your beating heart out of your chest sort of loss, where then the heart gets thrown on the field and hops around and so forth. We've all seen it. We've all felt it. It's happened to every team, every fan base. But when you look at the legacy of certain teams, take the Steelers, for example. You think about the Steelers, you think about perennial winners, you think about the fact that they had the 70s dynasty and Mean Joe Green and that entire time, Terry Bradshaw, or the Green Bay Packers, of course, winning the first 2 Super Bowls. That's sort of a legacy that comes to mind when you mention their name. Even the 49ers, for example, in the 80s with their dynasty with Bill Walsh and Joe Montana. But for the Buffalo Bills, the early success, their early history in the AFL is not remembered by many. A lot of us weren't around. I was extremely young at the time myself. I was born within days of the formation of the Bills franchise. And remember listening on the hi-fi and hearing Van Miller's calls of those early games. And in fact, the Bills went on to win the 1964 and 65 AFL championships. They got beat in the 66 championship. Had they not, they'd have gone to the first Super Bowl. And they might have had a shot against those Packers. But we don't really remember that about the Bills as their legacy. It predates most of us, except for fans like me, perhaps. Truthfully, our first experience, for many of us, our first memory, our thing that comes to mind when we talk about the Buffalo Bills first, for many of us, dates back to the glory and the heartbreak of the Super Bowl years. That's really the first thing you think about the Bills. And of course, it's a legacy because it's one of endurance, it's one of trying, it's one of fighting. It's not a legacy of loss, but the losses caused the heartache. And frankly, looking back at it, those Super Bowl years, though glorious, actually formed the baseline for the heartache that Bills fans feel today. It actually layered on this initial huge heartache from 4 years with no success of winning the Super Bowl. And that's created the backdrop for all the other pain that's come since. Throughout the drought, and then even the pain of the recent losses. It's all built upon that starting legacy that most fans associate with. So the Bills fan base is one that's really built of pain. And it's that pain, not the glory of recent success and some of the big wins, not the glory of shutting out an opponent on a beautiful September afternoon. It is the losses. It is the pain of the losses that has cemented us together into this fan base that's like a family. I was out of town just last weekend attending a fair, saw a little girl wearing a Josh Allen jersey. Now, this wasn't in the Buffalo area, so I'm like, well, this is a Bills fan, great. I go up and speak to the girl's father. He talks about where he's from, that he's a Bills fan. I'm remarking how great his daughter looks with the Josh Allen jersey, and he shows me his sneakers that have Bills logos on them. Bills fans are one of a kind, and we're a family. And it's because of the pain that we've suffered that's bonded us together into this family. It's created what we call Bills Mafia, started by Del Reed and others in 2011, right in the middle of the drought, right in the middle of the playoff drought, Bills Mafia got started. It's the family born of the pain we've suffered together as fans throughout the history of this team. And of course, that pain goes on now, even still. But Buffalo and its fan base and Bills Mafia have become basically headline news with helping others in pain. When Josh Allen's grandmother, Patricia Allen, passed, the famous $17 donation that came from Bills Mafia resulted in a resounding over $1 million that went to Oshai Children's Hospital, and they ended up naming a wing of the hospital after Patricia Allen. Or even before that, when the Bills had no playoffs for 17 years, but Andy Dalton and the Cincinnati Bengals managed to win a game, sending the Bills players standing in the middle of the locker room in Miami into a frenzy because they were now in the playoffs. How did Bills Mafia respond? They donated tremendous amounts of money to Andy Dalton's charity. When Damar Hamlin's situation came about, Bills Mafia was there and inspired an entire world. And then even most recently, Mark Andrews dropping the two-point conversion last January 26th. I'm sorry, that was the title game. But last January, dropping the two-point conversion, knocking the Ravens out of the playoffs. What did Bills fans do? They started donating to a type 1 diabetes charity because Mark Andrews has type 1 diabetes. So this fan base has been born of pain. It's gloried together and loved and hugged together in the huge wins, but it's done the same in the losses. Wide right wasn't a missed field goal. It was an identity setter for the Bills fan base. And now, of course, we've arrived at a point where the Bills are great, but again, that pain of playoff exits, the last two by 3 points to the very same team, that's built up a love amongst this fan base and an energy in this fan base and a waiting that will explode when this team breaks through, which I believe is happening this season. But the fact is, this pain has an energy, a huge energy. And it has been building for decades. Let's say, for example, if wide right actually goes through and the Bills win Super Bowl 25. Would they have gone to 3 more? Would the fan base feel the same today, having a Super Bowl championship in its past? Or do we feel the way we feel because we don't have one? That pain has made us, but it's made us into a family. And it's created an energy that may well be unstoppable this season. We didn't become a family by winning. The Bills fan base, Bills Mafia, became a family by hugging each other in the losses. And that's created the most powerful fan base that's going to empower the most powerful team in the NFL this season, the season of reckoning. Now, certainly the 4 Super Bowl losses the Bills took in the 90s were acutely painful. And like I've said, they created the baseline for Buffalo Bills fan pain throughout the decades ever since. But at least with those 4 Super Bowl losses, and even the horror of the Music City Miracle that followed the Super Bowl years, at least the Bills had some notoriety from having been there. There was even movie made about it, The Four Falls of Buffalo. But the pain of the Super Bowl losses maybe was even worse during the drought, because during the drought, that acute pain and caring about the team, I think, collapsed into disillusionment by many fans. And trust was broken. And then selections of various coaches, Dick Duran, Rex Ryan, it didn't feel like the Bills were really in it to win. But then Sean McDermott arrived in 2017 with 3 words: trust the process. And it was difficult to start because the trust of many fans had already been broken by the drought, and they were sitting in disillusionment. But lo and behold, Sean McDermott gets the Bills to the playoffs in his very first season, breaking the drought. He gets Kyle Williams to a playoff game. Finally. It happens with the team standing in a steamy locker room in Miami, watching Andy Dalton on the monitor throw to Tyler Boyd and put the Bills into the playoffs. And the trust started building at that point. It wasn't quite there yet when the next season rolled around, the draft that is, and Buffalo selected Josh Allen. Many privately and, of course, publicly trashed that selection, indicating the Bills had selected the wrong Josh. But that, too, turned out to be a great thing. The very next season, Josh having his coming out party, the Thanksgiving game at the Cowboys, where the Bills were underdogs and going to be served up like so much turkey to the Cowboys. And Buffalo kicked their ass. Trust starts to build back. And the Bills make it to the playoffs that season, losing to Houston after owning a big lead in the first half. And then, of course, the losses to Kansas City begin. And that pain of those losses gets us back at least to where it was in the Super Bowl times. The Bills are at least relevant. They're making news for the wrong reasons, especially losing 2 very close playoff games, the last 2 playoff exits to the Chiefs, both by 3 points. But over that time, the trust has kind of built back. And now you can feel it this season. There's something different in the air about this particular season. Something different about the Bills. It's a vibe, it's a sense. Let's talk about it in the next segment. The Bills' 17-year playoff drought is becoming a distant memory. But there is still trust issues, of course. For example, a year ago we were talking about the fact that the Bills were in transition and they were backing out of their Super Bowl window. The exit of many strong veterans now weakening the team. No receivers. But of course, Buffalo went through and had perhaps their best offensive performance in the history of the team, scoring 30 or more points in 8 straight games, going to the AFC title game, losing once again by 3 points to the Kansas City Chiefs. So that trust was really restored. And now we're at this point. The preseason has just started. It's Friday the 25th. They're practicing today as I make this podcast. And the buzz is back. The vibe is back. And there's a lot going on to let you know that. First of all, the Bills just finished last season, that transition season I was just speaking about, having scored 30 or more points in 8 straight games, having scored the most points in the NFL in consideration of the playoffs included. And over the offseason, We had free agent signings, a defensive-oriented draft, and even in these first couple of days in training camp, we're starting to see that the names we selected are going to make a big impact. So there's definitely a buzz about this year. And it's not just coming from me, the Ralph. I'm seeing other pods now, big-time pods with huge subscriber bases, coming out and saying that this is the best roster the Buffalo Bills have had under Josh Allen. Yes, I said that 2 weeks ago. Thank you. And this season has huge, huge hopes. And there's other things in place. The Bills are more visible. They're becoming more national. There's no small market tag on them. Hallmark is doing the Buffalo Bills Christmas movie. And then, of course, Hard Knocks is in town as we speak, covering the Bills training camp. And the Bills, of course, are the only team in the NFL that is favored at this time to win in every single one of their regular season contests. So yeah, I believe it. All signs point to now. Because there's an energy that's built up over the decades with the losses we've incurred, the love and embrace we've had over those losses, and then the love and embrace we've had over fantastic wins. And the love that's on this team with a bunch of guys that love each other just like brothers, and maybe even more so. So yes, all signs point to now, which leads to what I'm going to say next. So all of this leads me to believe that redemption is coming for the Buffalo Bills and their fan base. I believe that redemption will be seismic. Of course, we've already talked about the fact that this Bills roster seems poised to go out and do some real damage to the rest of the league this season. We identified a number of those factors in the last segment, left out a big one that, by the way, we've got the MVP from last season in quarterback Josh Allen. So I believe the redemption will be seismic. But what do I mean by that? Well, again, as I said earlier in the podcast, had the Bills won that very first Super Bowl, would the angst and the pain, even if they'd gone to the next three and lost them, be as much as they are with the fact that they did lose all four? And then, of course, to that pain, you added the Music City Miracle. And then there were lesser losses. The opening night, Monday night loss to the Patriots, I believe in 2007. And then I believe there was a Monday night game versus the Cowboys. George Wilson had 2 interceptions, and the Bills were stunned and lost that game. But of course, those are minor compared to going through 13 seconds. And then going through the near tragedy of Damar Hamlin and a team whose gas tank was empty and a quarterback whose house was trashed when the Bengals showed up for that divisional match. And then, of course, the past 2 seasons. 3 points only, 3 points only, down to the Chiefs in both cases. But as I've said, this losing, this pain, it builds an energy. And that energy has never been relieved. It's almost like tectonic plates where one is bearing against the other. And it bears and bears and is being held back, but it's still trying to move and being held back. And the potential energy that builds up is huge. And when it finally snaps, it's a cataclysm. In the case of an earthquake, it's a lot of shaking, and then a tsunami. In the case of the Buffalo Bills, when this redemption finally comes, when these Bills win this Super Bowl, the release of energy will be like the release when a tectonic plate flips open. And the Bills won't just manage to get by an opponent in the playoffs or in the Super Bowl. They will crush them because the flow of energy that's been stored up over decades of waiting for this will emerge. It's coming, people. It's coming this season. Watch closely. The Bills are in their last year of this stadium that's rich with history, that has the history of those 90s Super Bowl teams, that has the history of glorious wins and heart-wrenching losses. But this team and this fan base looks ready. And I believe Seismic Redemption is coming. And before I close here, before our end titles and music, I'm going to give you a little prediction. It's been pre-recorded. Enjoy. And until next time, go Bills. I am the Ralph. This is the Ralph Rant. Out. So the Bills with a 37 at the Ravens' 37-yard line, now in field goal range. Here we go. Josh Allen in the pistol. James Cook off to his left. Allen calling the signals. Now Josh Palmer will motion left. And a snap and the pitch to James Cook. No, it's a fake. Josh is going to make his way to the right. He's rolling out. He avoids a rusher there. He's looking downfield. He's got a man. It's Elijah Moore at the 10-yard line, and he will trot in for the touchdown. Elijah Moore was by himself, and Ravens safety Kyle Hamilton is screaming at a teammate. Unbelievable here. The Bills take the lead, and the season is off and running.